Okay, this is the video for the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, part one of two. So the first thing, let's get a couple caveats out of the way. The first thing is I do not have the time when the jurors are being sworn in. So we got very lucky with the Rittenhouse trial and that information was available, but we don't have the time because it's happening right now with the Maxwell trial. For those of you who aren't familiar, Ghislaine Maxwell is the partner and accomplice for Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile, or, well, in his case, he's a hebephile, who was basically pimping underage girls to very wealthy and influential, prominent people. So, yeah, money will buy a lot of things. Okay, so he's dead because he committed suicide. She is still alive. There's a lot of question about who they had connections with and who were these people that were procuring services and girls from them. Because apparently there's a little black book floating around that nobody can find, all that sort of stuff. In any event, he has committed suicide in jail. She's still alive. Now she's going to trial. And this represents a couple of interesting issues. So there's that. And we don't have the time that jury's sworn in. Now, we do know, based on what we can find on the internet, that criminal court in New York opens or begins at 8:30 in the morning. Her trial, the jury is selected and sworn in this morning. The trial will begin this afternoon. So I can only assume, because this is such a big deal and a high-profile case, that it would be the first thing on the judge's docket this morning. So the trial, the jurors should be sworn in at somewhere, I'm guessing, between 8:30 and 9 a.m. It is possible that they were all coming in at 8:30. I don't think they necessarily get sworn in at 8:30. So I'm going to set the chart up for 9 a.m. And the reason I'm doing this, now remember, we don't have time, so we're kind of playing here. And this gets a little tricky because at 8:30 a.m., the moon is at 25 Sagittarius, right? Which makes Jupiter the chart ruler and the ruler of the prosecution. At 9 a.m., Capricorn rises, which also puts Juno on the ascendant, and Saturn rules the prosecution, Saturn in Aquarius. So for those of you who aren't familiar with astrology or are new to it, this sounds like this makes no sense. But these little fine points make a big difference. So I'm going to go with the Capricorn rising. And the reason I'm going to go with Capricorn rising is because Juno is on the ascendant for the 9 a.m. chart, and Juno on the ascendant. So the asteroid is very prominent here. Made me wonder, because Juno typically represents women and motherhood and wives and domestic affairs. So I'm thinking a woman has to be very prominent in this and involved in the prosecution, right? Well, and I looked it up, and yet, lo and behold, it's Andrew Cuomo's mother-in-law is the lead prosecutor on this case. So Juno on the ascendant fits the description very well. So we're going to go with 9 a.m. and Capricorn rising. Now, there are a number of things that bother me about this chart. So again, I don't know criminal law. I've never been in a criminal proceeding. So if you know or you know somebody who can answer these questions, that would be great. So again, this looks a little weird, right? And it's not because the outcome was decided ahead of time like it was in the Rittenhouse trial. And boy, did that turn out to be a colorful example of what we were talking about. In this particular case, there are some things that aren't feeling right. I wonder if it's normal for criminal trials like this to have ongoing discussions prior to the actual trial itself, the jury trial itself, because that's what it looks like here. So right off the top, here are the high points, and then we're going to get to part two and a more in-depth look at this chart tomorrow. So the first thing is with Saturn ruling the first house, the prosecution, and the moon ruling Ghislaine, or the defense. The moon and Saturn are enshrined with each other. So this would indicate there is a sympathetic response between the prosecution and the defense, which I don't know. It seems like, as a non-lawyer, I'm saying this doesn't seem like something you would want. So it would seem that the prosecution is actually sympathetic to Ghislaine, which makes no sense either. Now, what's interesting is that we've got the Mercury Cazimi the sun. Mercury is under or in the heart of the sun, which is a very protected, blessed, lucky, once in a blue moon kind of position to have. So when you can get it, it's amazing. Because Cazimi means that basically you're under the protection of the king. The sun represents the highest authority in the chart, and in this particular case, in the trial, which would be the judge herself or himself, whoever the judge is. I think it's a woman. So with Mercury Cazimi the sun, This would be paperwork and documents. There's information that's being protected and safeguarded by the judge, which may or may not be revealed to the jury. That's interesting and suspect and concerning, and should be very alarming for those of us who don't have that kind of bankroll to get those kinds of lawyers or judicial favors. Now, that Sun Mercury Cazimi, which rules the judge, is in positive supportive aspect to both Saturn and the moon. Now, the sun or the judge has moved away from, right, it's moved away from the defense or Ghislaine Maxwell, that party, and it's applying to Saturn or the prosecution, which can mean a couple of things actually. But in this particular case, what I would suspect is that there may be something that has recently been given to the judge that's of significant value or benefit to the judge, which would make the judge much more amenable and eager to get the prosecution and the defense to work together nicely so Ghislaine isn't hung quite so high from a tree. Now, the reason I say that is because the 11th house in the chart should represent the jurors, right? Because apparently in a criminal trial with a jury, there's two different things happening. You've got a jury that makes a verdict or a decision, and then you've got a judge that makes a determination whether it's fair, it's okay, and how much of that they're actually going to apply. So the judge has the final say about what the actual outcome of the trial is, but the jury makes the initial recommendations, I think. Something like that. It's a little weird. So again, if you know somebody who knows anything about criminal law, please by all means educate us. So the 11th house is ruled by Mars in this chart. Mars is opposing Uranus. It's a wide opposition to Uranus. So some of the heat has dissipated from this in terms of violence and threats and people being completely unstable and irrational when it comes to this case and the issues in it. However, Mars is applying to Jupiter in the second house. Jupiter's in Aquarius. Aquarius rules the common man. Mars is in Scorpio. The jury is going to want blood. They're going to want their pound of flesh for this. So she's not going to get a sympathetic jury. Like, no matter how hard you try, no one's going to be sympathetic to her in any meaningful way for her benefit. So, and in this particular case, the issue of principle is going to run very high. And also, too, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of interest in the salacious details of this case. So there's a whole lot of perving going on with the jury in this trial. Jesus, how long have we been on the planet? We still haven't evolved, right? Okay. Now, and the men are going to be more sympathetic to Ghislaine than the women are. Guaranteed. I guarantee it. Now, some other things that are coming up. The named asteroid Nabokov, who is the author of the book Lolita, who is the thing when we talk about hebephiles, specifically adults who are attracted to teenage or like adolescent girls and boys. If you have not read the book, I highly recommend reading the book. Just completely ignore the movie. It has nothing to do with the way the book was written. The book is disturbing and creepy and amazing all at the same time. The movie is literally a bunch of Hollywood hebephiles, like glamorizing it and glamorizing their personal taste in little girls. Totally different things. Read the book and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So with Nabokov, is here in the chart, conjuncting Neptune and trining Mars. There's a couple of things here that I would say. The first thing is that any males in the jury are going to be more sympathetic to her cause than they will others, because there's going to be a sense of sympathy or understanding of it being attracted to younger girls, right? It's not to say that women aren't attracted to younger people either. It's just a whole different mentality. And again, we're speaking specifically of this jury. And it may even be a singular one who is absolutely like projecting his stuff onto this. The other thing is Nabokov conjunct Neptune and trining Mars like this. One of the things that I absolutely expect to see emphasized over and over and over again is both Epstein being a hebephile and being lost in the throes of a sex addiction. Right. And also basically focusing on his sexual appetite and her being victimized or drug along with it. The other thing that I would look for with this particular chart, especially with Juno rising on the chart, is a pity plea. So I would also expect a big emphasis on her being the victim, like almost literally like a domestic violence victim, where she was basically his common law wife. And, she didn't really have a choice. And, the whole, domestic abuse, mentality that makes it difficult for women and men to get out of situations and will go along with whatever their abuser's doing because they don't psychologically see a way out. Watch and see if that's not a huge key part of how they play this. The other thing that I saw in this chart is Ghislaine, the named asteroid Ghislaine, which is close to Ghislaine. You have to go with phonetics when you do the named asteroids, is conjuncting the North Node in Gemini. Now, this Ghislaine fixed or asteroid and the North Node are both trining Saturn. Again, a sympathetic prosecution. I'm not comfortable with this at all. I don't like this. Prosecutors should not be sympathetic to, child sex traffickers. Now, what's interesting is that the Juno on the top of the chart, which is the lead prosecutor for the prosecution team, is absolutely not in any kind of favorable relationship with Ghislaine and the defense. So the Moon and Chiron are in opposition to each other. That Juno on the first house, which represents the lead prosecutor, it sets up a T-square for that. So there's a lot of pressure on the lead prosecutor, but also she's not giving an inch. But I don't think it's just one person, so I'm not sure how this works. Again, I've only had 10 minutes to look at this chart, so we'll take a deeper look later. But it is to say that my suspicion is that even though the prosecution team or the prosecution process itself is going to be sympathetic to Ghislaine, so it's actually in many ways going to not be as harsh on her as it should be. That Juno setting up this T-square across the angles in this chart involving the defense also, and the third house, which is documents. Again, we're back to documents and information. There's stuff being withheld. The lead prosecutor herself is definitely going to be out for blood. So she's not going to give this girl an inch, but good luck getting what she needs, because some of it is being pocketed or held back. And the judge has no little influence or participation in this. And if it's not the judge directly involved in this, it would definitely be somebody in a position of higher authority over all of them. So there are some very important, influential power players in the judicial circuits that are or connected to judicial circuits that are playing games here. All right. So what else? And I think that's all I have for right now. Oh, there's one other thing. No, that's all documents and information. Okay. So right off the top, again, and this is part one. We'll do a more detailed examination a little bit later. And also, too, the caveat is that we don't have an actual time the jury was sworn in, so I'm guessing it was 9 a.m. If it was earlier than 9 a.m., it's going to throw everything off. Anyway, so. Okay, so the prosecutor for the prosecution team, lead prosecutor, should be a woman, and it is. And it's Juno, it rises on the chart, and she's the mother-in-law of Andrew Cuomo. I thought that was pretty interesting. The mother-in-law, Juno. And Juno, or the prosecutor, sets up a T-square to both the defense, or Ghislaine, the moon, and Chiron in that third house, which has a lot to do with information and documents, right? So the lead prosecutor is out for blood, but she may not be able to have such an easy, straightforward way to go because there are literally things being withheld. And also, possibly, interesting enough, I would look for the possibility of something being damaged or too damaged to use, compromised. So there are things that would be useful, but they're going to be considered damaged or compromised, and that will be an issue as far as whether it's admissible or usable. I'm making educated guesses here. We'll see how this plays out. Nabokov, the named asteroid Nabokov, is conjunct Neptune trining Mars. Now, in this particular case, I would absolutely expect two things. One, I would expect Jeffrey Epstein's ghost to be risen from the grave, and a heavy emphasis put on his sex addiction, and also This fantasy world and her being a victim, right? With Juno and Neptune here with Nabokov, being a victim and the domestic violence. Look for them to make a lot of statements and claims about her being the equivalent of a common law wife, and specifically a domestic abuse victim, right? Because she was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. She couldn't leave him. She was practically his wife, whatever. Give me a break. Anyway, but this is their job, to try and make a case and to emotionally and psychologically sway the jury. So it doesn't have to be accurate or correct. It just needs to be convincing. That's the problem with jury trials. I mean, I don't know that it's much better when there's no jury, because the judges are just as human. So convincing and swaying them is the same thing. But when it's just a judge, there's a lot, depending on what state you're in, apparently, there's a lot less latitude for making, big mistakes, based on your feelings, not the actual technical legal standings. So there's that. Also, it looks like the judge has received something beneficial from the defense's side, or Ghislaine Maxwell's side of this case, recently. And they're now moving into work with the prosecution as well. So the judge in this is working with the prosecution and the defense to try and give this more of a sympathetic direction for Ms. Maxwell. Now, also, too, Ms. Maxwell is receiving a lot of sympathy or sympathetic overtures from the prosecution, which makes no sense, because we just talked about how the lead prosecutor is out for blood. But if she is part of a team, it may be that her team, the rest of her team, is not as bloodthirsty as she is, or outraged. And also, too, it could be that the prosecution process of this could be favorable or work to Ghislaine's advantage, which we also don't want to see. But if people are withholding documents or claiming that things are compromised or damaged, that will definitely, make an issue as well. And also, too, again, I would look for some of the men or a man on the jury to be sympathetic to Epstein and the whole hebephile thing, being attracted to younger girls, or young girls, not women, young girls, whether he comes out and says it or not. So that's going to be a problem. Now, I will say, before I finish this video, some of the other things that are challenging in this particular case also are the fact that when we talk about teenage girls, we're, for a lot of people in our mind, depending on where you live and what you see on a regular basis, right? There's a difficulty in distinguishing between victims and volunteers. And apparently in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, because Jeffrey Epstein was very, very careful how he set this up. See, it pays to have access to really well-paid lawyers so you can get information on criminal stuff, in casual dinner conversation. And remember, some of the Epstein's friends were judges, right? So because Epstein had the contact information, had been in contact with the parents of these girls, it's going to be very difficult to prove or convince. Remember, this is not about proving anything. It's about convincing people. It's going to be very difficult to convince the jury that these girls were not volunteers and that parents were not participatory in this. And if they had thought anything bad was going to happen, that they wouldn't have let their daughters go. And, yada, yada, yada. So that's going to get played out a lot as well. The other thing is with, the question becomes like, how young is too young, right? So we've only got 4 girls on the prosecution side that are acting as witnesses, I suppose, or giving testimony, compared to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and scads and thousands of these girls. Now, the thing to understand is that one of the things they're not talking about is, I can almost guarantee you that a lot of these girls, not all of them, but a lot of these girls were not only underage, but were also sex workers. When you are under 18 or under 16, depending where you are, it's very difficult for you to go get work, right? I had a girlfriend decades ago who ran away from home because there was some sexual abuse in the family. And she got as far as Florida, but she was 14 at the time. And at 14 years old, you're not getting a job. So she had no choice, because she was a runaway living on the streets, which at the time for her was safer and preferable to being at home. That's how bad it was. She ended up being a sex worker on the streets, and went through the whole thing, drug addiction, all sort of stuff, and lived 100 adult lives before she finally came home to sort out things with the other parts of her family. But this is to say that there are a lot of teenagers on the street who are on the street because it's safer than being home. And that's a really terrifying statement. So when you're a teenager and being on the street is safer than being at home, and you need to eat, and there are a lot of predatory personalities out there, of course, sex work is going to be the first thing you fall into, not because you sign up for it, but because you're hungry, you're homeless, you're dirty, and you're scared, and you're stressed out of your mind. And you don't know what you're going to do because it's not like you can go get a job. And along comes this person who says, hey, kid, listen, you hungry? I can give you some money, right? And that's how that all starts. So that's going to be an issue in this particular case. And it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to establish that this was involuntary trafficking. Remember that word, involuntary. So it also looks like the prosecution and or the judge is going to be at, well, it actually looks more like prosecution. No, that's not right. I'm reading that wrong. Okay, so we're going to end this here. This is part 1. Part 2 will be coming out tomorrow. Let's keep an eye on the trial and see how it goes. But so far, it's not looking like a slam dunk victory in terms of putting Ghislaine away for the rest of her life. Right, and that's the other thing, too, is that the other issue is going to be, looking at this and using some common sense here, is that you can't, one of the issues maybe brought up is about this business about trying somebody for somebody else's crime. So if she is presented successfully as a domestic violence victim who had to go along with this because Jeffrey, the hebephile sex addict, had complete control over her, and she, what else could she do? If that is presented successfully, one of the other things that goes with that is that we can't convict her for his crimes. So we have to hold her to a different standard because she too was a victim. Watch and see if that doesn't become a major part of this as well. All right, so onward, upward, and forward. I'll see you guys tomorrow.